My name is Alex, and I'm a 38-year-old software engineer living in a cozy suburb just outside of Seattle. My wife, Emily, is a beautiful and intelligent 35-year-old artist. We've been married for 15 years and have two wonderful kids, Josh, who's 10, and Lily, who's 8. Our life was pretty idyllic, VJ, or so I thought. Emily and I met in college. She was studying fine arts, and I was deep into my computer science degree. We clicked immediately, drawn together by our shared love of creativity and innovation. Our relationship flourished, and we decided to tie the knot right after graduation. We bought a charming house on a quiet street, surrounded by towering evergreens and friendly neighbors. It was the perfect setting to start our family. Our house is a quaint two-story home with a picket fence and a garden that Emily meticulously maintains. Her studio is filled with canvases, brushes, and a rainbow of paints. It's her sanctuary, a place where she creates magic. I converted the basement into my home office, complete with a high-end computer setup and shelves lined with tech gadgets. Our home was our castle, a place where we built our dreams and watched our kids grow. Life was busy but fulfilling. My job demanded long hours, but I loved it. Emily's art was gaining recognition, and she started selling her pieces online and at local galleries. We juggled our careers, kids' school events, soccer practices, and family outings. Despite the hectic schedule, we always found time for each other, VJ at least. I thought we did. In retrospect, there were signs that things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Emily started spending more time in her studio, often locking the door behind her. I chalked it up to her needing space to work on her art. She became more secretive with her phone, always keeping it on silent and face down. I dismissed it, thinking she was just engrossed in her online art community. Our conversations became shorter, our intimacy less frequent, but I attributed it to the stress of everyday life. Our kids, Josh and Lily, are the light of my life. Josh is a bright and curious boy, always asking questions about how things work. He loves building models and has a knack for solving puzzles. Lily is our little artist, just like her mom. She spends hours drawing and painting, often asking Emily for tips and tricks. Watching them grow and develop their passions has been the greatest joy of my life. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared a few months ago. Emily's brother, Jake, who lives a few blocks away, started visiting more often. Jake is a charming guy, a few years younger than Emily. He works as a bartender and has a reputation for being a bit of a ladies' man. I never thought much of it, VDJ after all, his family. He would come over for dinner, help Emily with her garden, or just hang out in her studio. I was glad they were close. Family is important, and Jake was great with the kids. But then, things started to feel off. Emily seemed distant, lost in her thoughts even when we were all together. She and Jake had inside jokes, little moments of shared laughter that excluded me. I shrugged it off, blaming my growing paranoia on stress and overwork. I trusted Emily completely, VDJ. She was my rock, my partner in everything. One evening, as I was tucking Josh and Lily into bed, I overheard a conversation between Emily and Jake in her studio. Their voices were low, intimate. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably affectionate. A cold shiver ran down my spine, but I pushed it away. This was Emily and Jake, siblings who were just close, right? The turning point came when I accidentally stumbled upon a message on Emily's phone. She had left it on the kitchen counter while she was out running errands. A notification popped up, and without thinking, I glanced at it. It was a text from Jake. "I miss you. Can't wait to see you tonight." My heart stopped. This was not how siblings talk to each other. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as doubts I had buried deep began to surface. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with questions and scenarios, each more painful than the last. Was I imagining things? Was there an innocent explanation? Or was my wife, the woman I had loved and trusted for years, betraying me with her own brother? The days that followed were a blur of suspicion and confusion. I started paying closer attention to Emily's behavior, looking for signs, clues, VJ, anything that could confirm or dispel my growing fears. I felt like I was losing my mind, caught in a web of doubt and paranoia. But one thing was clear. I needed to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. After that night, my mind became a whirlwind of suspicion and uncertainty. I started noticing things I had previously ignored or dismissed. Emily's frequent late-night texts, her sudden need to leave the house for short errands, and the way she and Jake seemed to share a secret world that I wasn't a part of. All of it began to feel sinister. One Saturday morning, I decided to confront Emily subtly. She was in the kitchen, making breakfast for the kids. I watched her from the doorway, taking in her carefree smile and the way she hummed to herself. It was hard to believe that she could be hiding something so devastating, but I needed to know. "Hey, Em," I said casually, leaning against the doorframe. "You and Jake seem to be spending a lot of time together lately. Is everything okay?" She looked up, surprised, and then laughed. "Yeah, Alex. Everything's fine. Jake's just been going through a rough patch and I'm trying to be there for him. Why do you ask?" Her answer seemed reasonable, but it did little to quell my doubts. "Just curious. It's great that you're close. Family should stick together." She smiled and returned to her cooking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. I needed more evidence before I could confront her directly. The thought of hiring a private investigator crossed my mind, but it felt too drastic, too invasive. Instead, I decided to keep a close eye on things myself. Over the next few weeks, I became a detective in my own home. I checked Emily's phone whenever I got the chance, looking for suspicious messages or calls. I paid attention to her schedule, noting any changes or unexplained absences. It felt wrong to be so distrustful, but I couldn't help it. The doubt was eating me alive. One evening, Emily told me she was going to meet a friend for coffee. As she left the house, I decided to follow her. I waited a few minutes before grabbing my keys and heading out. I felt like a character in a bad spy movie, but I was desperate for answers. I trailed her car at a safe distance, my heart pounding in my chest. She drove across town to a small, cozy CAF GC. I parked a block away and watched as she got out of the car and walked inside. A few minutes later, Jake showed up. They embraced warmly, and my heart sank. This wasn't just a casual meeting between siblings. There was something more, something I couldn't ignore. They sat at a corner table, talking animatedly. I couldn't hear their conversation from where I was, but their body language spoke volumes. Emily was leaning in, her eyes fixed on Jake, who was holding her hand across the table. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and heartbreak. I watched them for what felt like hours, unable to tear myself away. Eventually, they left the CAF GC together, and I followed them back to our neighborhood. Emily dropped Jake off at his place before heading home. I drove around aimlessly for a while, trying to process what I had seen. When I finally returned home, Emily was in the living room, reading a book. She looked up and smiled as I walked in. "Hey, how was your evening?" "Fine," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just went for a drive. Needed to clear my head." She nodded and returned to her book, seemingly unbothered. But inside, I was a wreck. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, unable to sleep. My mind replayed the scene at the CAF GC over and over again. The next day, I decided to confront Jake. I needed to hear his side of the story, to see if he would admit to anything. I called him and asked if we could meet up. He agreed, sounding cheerful and unsuspecting. We met at a park near his place. It was a sunny afternoon, and families were out enjoying the weather. I felt a pang of jealousy watching them, wishing my own family life was as simple and carefree. "Hey, Alex," Jake greeted me with a smile. "What's up?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Jake, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. What's going on between you and Emily?" His smile faltered, and he looked confused. "What do you mean?" I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I saw you two at the CAF GC last night. You looked close. Closer than siblings should be." Jake's eyes widened, and he shook his head. "Alex, it's not what you think. Emily and I are just really close. We've always been like that." "Really?" I challenged. "Because it didn't look like just sibling closeness to me." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what to tell you, man. Emily's been having a tough time lately, and I've been trying to support her, that's all." His words didn't comfort me. In fact, they made me feel even worse. Was Emily confiding in Jake instead of me? Was our marriage really in such trouble that she needed someone else to lean on? I left the park feeling more confused and hurt than ever. Jake's denial didn't match what I had seen, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. But without concrete evidence, I was stuck in this limbo of doubt and suspicion. I didn't want to confront Emily without knowing for sure, but I couldn't continue living in this state of uncertainty. As the days went by, the tension in our house grew. Emily seemed oblivious to my inner turmoil, going about her daily routines as if nothing was wrong. But I knew better. I could feel the cracks in our relationship widening, threatening to swallow us whole. One night, as we lay in bed, I turned to her and asked, "Emily, is there something you need to tell me? Something about you and Jake?" She looked at me, her eyes wide with surprise. "What are you talking about, Alex?" "I've noticed how close you two have been lately," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "And I saw you at the CAF GC together. It looked different." Her expression shifted to one of anger. "Are you spying on me now? Following me around? That's not okay, Alex." "I am sorry," I said, feeling a mix of guilt and frustration. "I just needed to know. I needed to understand what's going on." Emily sighed and sat up, running a hand through her hair. "Jake and I are close, yes. We've always been. But there's nothing going on between us. You're being paranoid." Her words stung, but I couldn't let go of my doubts. "Then why all the secrecy? Why the late-night texts and the meetings?" "Because I needed someone to talk to," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been feeling so alone, Alex. You're always working, always busy. I needed someone to be there for me." Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut. Had I been so focused on work that I had neglected my wife? Was I the reason she felt so distant? "I'm sorry, Emily," I said, reaching for her hand. "I didn't realize you felt that way, but we need to talk about this, to work through it together." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I know. I'm sorry too. I should have come to you instead of Jake. I just didn't know how." We spent the rest of the night talking, trying to bridge the gap that had formed between us. It was a small step, but it felt like a start. However, the seed of doubt had already been planted, and I knew it would take more than one conversation to uproot it completely. Despite our late-night conversation, the seed of doubt had taken root in my mind, and I couldn't shake it. Emily's words were reassuring, but her actions continued to stir suspicion. The following weeks were a blur of forced smiles and strained conversations, each of us trying to pretend everything was normal while a storm brewed just beneath the surface. One day, I decided to take a more direct approach. I knew snooping wasn't ideal, but I needed answers. Emily had gone out to run some errands, leaving her phone charging on the kitchen counter. My heart pounded as I picked it up, feeling a mixture of guilt and desperation. I navigated to her messages and found a thread with Jake. My hands trembled as I read through their exchanges. Most were mundane, discussing family and daily activities. But then I found a string of messages that made my blood run cold. "Jake, I can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you so much." "Emily, I miss you too. Just thinking about last time makes me smile." "Jake, it was amazing. Can't wait to do it again." The world around me seemed to blur as I stared at the screen. There it was, in black and white VJ proof that my wife was having an affair with her own brother. The words were like a knife to my heart, each message cutting deeper than the last. I felt nauseous, my mind reeling from the betrayal. I put the phone down, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I had suspected something was wrong, but seeing it confirmed was a different kind of pain. I sank into a chair, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do now? How could I confront Emily about this without tearing our family apart? As I sat there, lost in thought, I heard the front door open. Emily was back. I quickly put her phone back on the counter and tried to compose myself. She walked into the kitchen, a smile on her face. "Hey, Alex," she said cheerfully. "How's your day going?" I forced a smile, trying to hide the turmoil inside. "Fine," I replied, my voice strained. "Just doing some work." She came over and kissed me on the cheek, her touch now feeling like a betrayal. I picked up some groceries. "Thought we could make dinner together tonight." "Sure," I said, my mind still racing. "That sounds nice." The rest of the evening was a blur. I went through the motions, helping with dinner, playing with the kids. But my mind was elsewhere. I kept replaying the messages in my head, trying to make sense of it all. How could Emily do this to me? To our family? Later that night, after the kids were asleep, I knew I had to confront her. There was no way I could keep this bottled up any longer. I found her in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book. "Emily, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, her expression concerned. "What's wrong, Alex?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I saw the messages on your phone, between you and Jake." Her face went pale, and she put the book down. "What messages?" You know what I'm talking about, I said, my voice rising. The ones where you're talking about how much you miss each other, how amazing last time was. She stood up, her eyes wide with panic. Alex, I can explain. Explain, I said, my anger boiling over. Explain how you've been cheating on me with your brother, how you've been lying to me and our kids. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head. It's not what you think. Please, just let me explain. I crossed my arms, glaring at her. Fine, explain. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. Jake and I, we've always been close. But a few months ago, things changed. It started with a kiss, and then it just escalated. I never meant for it to happen, Alex. I was feeling so alone, and Jake was there for me. It just happened. Her words felt like another punch to the gut. And you didn't think to talk to me? Your husband? I tried, she said, her voice breaking. But you were always so busy with work. I felt like I was losing you. So you turned to your brother instead? I said, my voice shaking with rage. Do you have any idea how sick and twisted that is? I know, she sobbed. I know it's wrong, but I didn't know how to stop it. Every time I tried, we just kept getting drawn back to each other. I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and heartbreak. You've destroyed our family, Emily. How do you expect me to ever trust you again? She collapsed onto the couch, her body racked with sobs. I'm so sorry, Alex. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. Love? I spat. You don't destroy the person you love. You've made a mockery of our marriage. How am I supposed to look at you knowing what you've done? She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. Please, Alex. We can work through this. I'll do anything to make it right. I felt a pang of pity, but the anger was too strong. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this, I said quietly. I need time to think. Without another word, I turned and left the room, leaving Emily sobbing on the couch. I went to the guest room and closed the door, sinking onto the bed. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, VJ anger, betrayal, sadness. How had my life come to this? The next few days were a blur. Emily tried to talk to me, but I couldn't bring myself to face her. I avoided her, spending most of my time at work or out of the house. The kids sensed something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to explain it to them. How do you tell your children that their mother has betrayed their family in the worst way possible? Eventually, I knew I had to talk to Jake. I needed to hear his side of the story, to understand how he could do this to me. I called him and asked him to meet me at a park, the same one where we had talked before. When I arrived, Jake was already there, sitting on a bench. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his hands. I walked over and sat down beside him, the tension between us palpable. Jake, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I know about you and Emily. He looked up at me, his face pale. Alex, IVDJ. Save it, I said, cutting him off. I just want to know why. Why did you do it? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, man. It just happened. Emily and I have always been close, and one thing led to another. I never meant to hurt you. Well, you did, I said, my voice shaking with anger. You've destroyed our family. How could you do this to me? I'm sorry, he said quietly. I know I messed up. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Make it right, I said, laughing bitterly. There's no making this right, Jake. You've crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. I know. And I'm so sorry, Alex. I wish I could take it all back. Well, you can't, I said, standing up. I need time to figure out what to do next. But one thing's for sure, of D, you're not welcome in our home anymore. He looked down, nodding. I understand. I walked away, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. My life had been turned upside down, and I had no idea how to put the pieces back together. But one thing was clear, VJ, I couldn't continue living like this. Something had to change. In the days following my confrontation with Jake, the atmosphere at home grew even more strained. Emily tried to talk to me, but I avoided her as much as possible, burying myself in work and spending time with the kids. I knew I couldn't keep up the charade forever, but I needed time to gather my thoughts and decide what to do next. One evening, after putting Josh and Lily to bed, I found Emily waiting for me in the living room. She looked tired, her eyes red from crying. I could see the guilt and regret etched on her face, but it did little to soothe the anger simmering inside me. Alex, we need to talk, she said, her voice trembling. I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Yeah, we do. We sat down on the couch, a heavy silence hanging between us. Emily took a deep breath, her hands trembling in her lap. I know I've hurt you, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. And I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. How did it happen, Emily? I asked, my voice tinged with anger. How do you go from being siblings to this? She looked down, tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't know. It started so innocently. We were just spending time together, talking about our lives, and then it just escalated. I was lonely, and Jake was there for me in a way I felt you weren't. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my emotions in check. So you turned to your brother? Do you have any idea how messed up that is? I know, she sobbed. I know it's wrong, but I didn't know how to stop it. Every time I tried to pull away, we just got drawn back together. Why didn't you come to me? I asked, my voice breaking. Why didn't you tell me how you were feeling? I tried, she said, her voice filled with regret. But you were always so busy with work. I felt like I was losing you, and Jake was there. I know it doesn't excuse what I did, but that's how it happened. We sat in silence for a while, the enormity of her betrayal hanging heavy in the air. I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and confusion, struggling to make sense of everything. What do we do now? I finally asked, my voice barely audible. I don't know, she admitted. But I want to make things right. I want to save our marriage if you'll let me. How can I ever trust you again? I asked, my heart aching. You've betrayed me in the worst way possible. I know, she said, her voice filled with desperation. But I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. I'll go to counseling, I'll cut off contact with Jacob DJ, I'll do anything. Just please don't give up on us. I looked at her, seeing the pain and regret in her eyes. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that we could work through this and come out stronger on the other side. But another part of me was filled with anger and doubt, unsure if I could ever move past her betrayal. I need time, I said finally. I need time to think about everything and decide what I want to do. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I understand. Take all the time you need. In the days that followed, I threw myself into work, trying to keep my mind off the turmoil at home. Emily kept her distance, respecting my need for space, but I could see the toll it was taking on her. She looked exhausted, her eyes constantly red from crying. One evening I came home to find Emily waiting for me in the kitchen. She looked nervous, her hands trembling as she held out a piece of paper. I've made an appointment with a marriage counselor, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought it might help if we talked to someone, to try and work through this. I took the paper, glancing at the appointment details. Part of me wanted to refuse, to walk away and leave her to deal with the mess she had created. But another part of me, the part that still loved her despite everything, wanted to give it a chance. Okay, I said finally, I'll go, but I'm not making any promises. She nodded, relief flooding her face. Thank you, Alex. That's all I'm asking for. The days leading up to the counseling session were filled with tension. We barely spoke, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing day. I spent most of my time with the kids, trying to shield them from the storm brewing in our marriage. When the day of the counseling session finally arrived, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. We drove to the therapist's office in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. As we walked into the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that our entire future was hanging in the balance. The counselor, Dr. Harris, greeted us warmly and led us into her office. We sat down on a plush couch, the room filled with calming colors and soft lighting. Despite the soothing environment, I felt anything but calm. Thank you for coming, Dr. Harris said, her voice gentle. I know this is a difficult time for both of you. Why don't we start by talking about what brought you here? Emily glanced at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. We're here because Emily cheated on me, I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. With her own brother. Dr. Harris' eyes widened slightly, but she quickly composed herself. That's a very serious issue, she said gently. Thank you for being honest, Alex. Emily, can you tell me what led to this? Emily took a deep breath, her hands trembling. I was feeling lonely, she began, her voice breaking. Alex was always busy with work, and I felt like I was losing him. Jake was there for me, and one thing led to another. I know it's wrong, but I didn't know how to stop it. Dr. Harris nodded, her expression compassionate. It's important to acknowledge the feelings that led to this situation. But it's also important to take responsibility for your actions. Emily, have you considered what you need to do to begin rebuilding trust with Alex? Emily nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I know I need to cut off contact with Jake. I'll do anything to make things right. Dr. Harris turned to me, her gaze steady. Alex, how do you feel about Emily's willingness to make these changes? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my emotions. I appreciate it, I said quietly. But I don't know if it's enough. The trust is broken, and I don't know if it can ever be repaired. Dr. Harris nodded, her expression understanding. Trust is a fragile thing, and rebuilding it takes time and effort. It's okay to feel uncertain. The important thing is to communicate openly and honestly with each other, and to take things one step at a time. As the session continued, we talked about our feelings, our fears, and our hopes for the future. It was a painful and emotional conversation, but it felt like a step in the right direction. By the end of the session, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward. Over the next few weeks, we continued with the counseling sessions, slowly working through the pain and betrayal. Emily cut off contact with Jake, focusing on rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the anger and hurt threatened to overwhelm me. But each time we found a way to come back to the table and talk through it. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emily reached for my hand. I know I have a lot to make up for, she said quietly, but I want you to know that I'm committed to making things right. I love you, Alex, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove it. I looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. It was a long road ahead, filled with uncertainty and challenges, but for the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt a spark of hope. I love you too, Emily, I said softly, and I'm willing to give this a chance, but it's going to take time. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I know, and I'm here for as long as it takes. As we sat there, hand in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace. Our marriage had been tested in the most painful way possible, but we were still standing, and as long as we were willing to fight for each other, there was a chance we could find our way back to the love we once had. Even as we continued with counseling and tried to rebuild our relationship, I couldn't completely shake the anger and betrayal I felt. The pain ran deep, and while part of me wanted to forgive Emily and move forward, another part of me craved justice for the hurt she had caused. I didn't just want to forgive and forget GJ. I wanted her to understand the gravity of her actions and feel a fraction of the pain she had inflicted on me. It was during one of those sleepless nights that an idea began to take shape in my mind. Revenge might not be the most mature course of action, but the thought of making Emily experience even a sliver of the turmoil I was going through felt oddly satisfying. It was a dark, vindictive part of me that I had never really acknowledged before, but it was there, and it was hungry for retribution. The first step in my plan was to gather evidence VDJ something concrete that would show Emily just how serious I was about making her accountable. I went through her phone again, this time taking screenshots of the incriminating messages between her and Jake. I stored them in a secure folder on my computer, a backup in case I needed them later. Next, I set about subtly undermining her reputation. Emily's art had garnered a decent following, and she was active on several online platforms. I created a few anonymous accounts and started leaving comments on her posts, hinting at her infidelity and causing a stir among her followers. It was petty and cruel, but I wanted her to feel the scrutiny and judgment that came with her actions. Then, I turned my attention to Jake. I knew he was still working as a bartender at a popular local bar, and I decided to pay him a visit. It was a busy Friday night when I walked in, the place buzzing with activity. I spotted Jake behind the bar, laughing and chatting with customers as if nothing had happened. The sight of him living his carefree life while my world had been turned upside down filled me with rage. I took a seat at the bar, waiting until he noticed me. When our eyes met, his smile faltered, and he quickly excused himself from the group he was talking to. He walked over, trying to appear nonchalant. "Hey, Alex," he said, his voice uncertain. "What are you doing here?" I leaned in, keeping my voice low but firm. "I just wanted to remind you that I haven't forgotten what you did, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." He looked around nervously, clearly uncomfortable. "Alex, man, I'm really sorry about everything. I never meant for any of this to happen. Save it," I snapped. "You're going to pay for what you did, and I'm going to make sure of it." Before he could respond, I stood up and left the bar, feeling a grim satisfaction at the fear in his eyes. It was a small victory, but it was a start. Back at home, I continued to play the part of the supportive husband, attending counseling sessions and trying to work through our issues. But behind the scenes, I was executing my plan. I started gathering more evidence, tracking Emily's movements and conversations, looking for any slip-ups that I could use against her. Then, I found the perfect opportunity. Emily had been invited to an art exhibition in the city, a prestigious event that could significantly boost her career. She was excited, spending weeks preparing for it. I decided to use this event to my advantage. On the night of the exhibition, I told Emily I had to work late and couldn't attend. She was disappointed but understood. As soon as she left, I started putting my plan into action. I sent an anonymous email to the event organizers, attaching the screenshots of her messages with Jake and hinting at her scandalous behavior. I knew it was a gamble, but I was banking on the organizers wanting to avoid any potential drama. Sure enough, about an hour later, Emily called me in tears. "Alex, they kicked me out of the exhibition," she sobbed. "Someone sent them these awful messages, and now everyone thinks I'm some kind of monster." I feigned surprise, hiding my satisfaction. "What? That's insane, Emily. Who would do something like that?" "I don't know," she cried, "but my career is ruined. How am I supposed to recover from this?" I offered her words of comfort, but inside, I felt a twisted sense of vindication. This was just the beginning of her downfall. Over the next few weeks, Emily's world began to crumble. Her online following dwindled, and she lost several lucrative commissions. The stress took a toll on her, and she became increasingly withdrawn and anxious. Meanwhile, I continued to gather evidence and bide my time, waiting for the right moment to strike. Finally, the day came when I decided to confront her with everything I had. It was a quiet evening, the kids were asleep, and we were sitting in the living room. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of anticipation and dread. "Emily, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. She looked up, her eyes filled with sadness and fatigue. "What is it, Alex?" "I've been doing some thinking," I began, "and I realize that I can't move forward without addressing the full extent of your betrayal." She frowned, confusion flickering across her face. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder with the screenshots of her messages with Jake. I turned the screen towards her, watching as her face went pale. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "This," I said, "is the evidence of your affair with Jake. I've documented everything VGJ, every message, every meeting. I've also been the one leaving those comments on your art posts and sending that email to the exhibition organizers." Her eyes widened in horror. "Why would you do this, Alex?" "Because I wanted you to feel the pain you caused me," I said coldly. "I wanted you to understand the consequences of your actions." She burst into tears, her body shaking with sobs. "I'm so sorry, Alex. I know I hurt you, but this is too much." I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. "You destroyed our marriage, Emily. You betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now you're facing the consequences." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with despair. "What do you want from me, Alex? How can I make this right?" "You can't," I said quietly. "It's too late for that. I've already filed for divorce." Her face crumpled and she collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. I stood up, feeling a mix of triumph and sorrow. This wasn't how I had imagined our life turning out, but it was the path we were on now. As I walked away, leaving her to her tears, I felt a strange sense of closure. The revenge I had sought had been carried out, but it didn't bring the satisfaction I had hoped for. Instead, it left me feeling empty and hollow, a stark reminder of the destruction that betrayal can bring. In the days that followed, Emily moved out of the house, taking the kids with her. We agreed to share custody, but the distance between us was now insurmountable. The divorce proceedings were quick, given the overwhelming evidence I had gathered. Emily didn't fight at VDGA, she was too broken to resist. As I settled into my new life, I tried to focus on healing and moving forward. The revenge had given me a temporary sense of power, but it hadn't brought the closure I needed. It was only through therapy and self-reflection that I began to understand the true path to healing lay in forgiveness. Not just of Emily, but of myself as well. Emily and I remained civil for the sake of the kids, but our relationship was forever changed. She eventually moved back in with her parents, seeking solace and support as she tried to rebuild her life. Jake disappeared from our lives, unable to face the fallout of his actions. Looking back, I realized that revenge had been a misguided attempt to regain control over a situation that had spiraled out of control. It had provided a temporary release, but it ultimately left me feeling more empty and lost than ever. In the end, the path to healing lay not in seeking retribution, but in finding a way to forgive and let go of the past. It was a long and painful journey, but it was the only way to truly move forward and find peace. Months passed after the divorce, and the initial storm of emotions began to settle. My life was in a state of reconstruction, much like a house after a hurricane. The revenge that I had sought, the anger that had driven me, all seemed like distant memories. What remained was a quiet determination to rebuild and find a new path forward. I moved into a new apartment, a modest but cozy space that was all mine. It was a fresh start, free from the shadows of my old life. The walls were bare, the rooms sparsely furnished, but it was a blank canvas waiting to be filled with new memories and experiences. The first few weeks in my new place were difficult. The silence was deafening, the absence of Emily and the kids a constant reminder of what I had lost. But slowly, I began to adjust. I focused on my work, threw myself into projects, and tried to reestablish a sense of normalcy. Emily and I maintained a civil relationship for the sake of Josh and Lily. We shared custody, and the kids would spend alternate weeks with each of us. It was tough, but we both knew it was the best arrangement for them. They were resilient, adapting to the new routine with remarkable ease. One evening, as I was picking up the kids from Emily's place, she pulled me aside. She looked better, more composed and at peace than I had seen her in months. "Alex," she began, her voice steady, "I just wanted to thank you for everything. I know we went through hell, but I think it's made us stronger, for the kids' sake and for our own." I nodded, appreciating her honesty. "I agree, Emily. It hasn't been easy, but we're making it work. That's what matters." We stood there for a moment, a silent understanding passing between us. It was a small step towards healing, a sign that maybe, just maybe, we could move past the bitterness and find a way to co-parent effectively. As the months turned into a year, I began to find my footing again. I started attending a support group for divorced men, and it was there that I met Tom. He was a few years older than me, a no-nonsense kind of guy who had been through his own share of marital struggles. We became fast friends, bonding over shared experiences and the ups and downs of rebuilding our lives. Tom introduced me to a hiking group, and I soon found solace in the great outdoors. Every weekend we would tackle a new trail, the physical exertion a cathartic release from the emotional weight I had been carrying. The camaraderie of the group, the breathtaking views, and the sense of accomplishment at the end of each hike were all steps towards healing. It was during one of these hikes that I met Sarah. She was a teacher, with a warm smile and a contagious zest for life. We struck up a conversation, and by the end of the hike, I felt a connection I hadn't felt in a long time. Over the next few weeks, we started seeing each other more regularly, our shared love for the outdoors bringing us closer. Sarah was a breath of fresh air. She was kind, patient, and understanding, qualities that I hadn't realized I had been missing. She listened without judgment, offering support and encouragement as I navigated the challenges of my new life. With her, I felt a sense of hope and possibility that had been absent for so long. One sunny afternoon, as we sat on a hill overlooking a beautiful valley, I found the courage to share my story with her. I told her about Emily, about the betrayal, and the aftermath. She listened quietly, her eyes filled with empathy. "You've been through a lot, Alex," she said softly, "but look at you now. You're strong, and you're rebuilding your life. That's something to be proud of." Her words touched me deeply. For the first time, I felt a sense of pride in how far I had come. The journey had been arduous, filled with pain and setbacks, but I was on the path to healing, and I wasn't alone. As my relationship with Sarah grew, so did my confidence in the future. We took things slow, both of us aware of the scars we carried from past relationships, but there was a mutual understanding, a shared determination to move forward with kindness and honesty. Emily and I continued to co-parent effectively, our communication improving with time. We attended a few joint counseling sessions, not to reconcile our marriage, but to ensure we were providing the best environment for Josh and Lily. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary, and it brought a sense of closure to our turbulent past. One day, as I was dropping the kids off at school, Josh turned to me with a serious expression. "Dad, are you happy?" The question took me by surprise. I knelt down to his level, looking into his earnest eyes. "Yes, Josh, I am happy. It's been a tough road, but we're all doing better now." He nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "I'm glad, Dad. I love you." "I love you too, buddy," I said, hugging him tightly. "And I'm always here for you and Lily." That moment with Josh was a turning point. It reaffirmed my commitment to my kids and to myself. The past would always be a part of me, but it didn't define my future. I was determined to create a life filled with love, hope, and new beginnings. Months turned into a year, and my relationship with Sarah deepened. We talked about our dreams, our fears, and our plans for the future. She met Josh and Lily, and they adored her. It was a slow integration, but it felt right. We were building something special, something based on trust and mutual respect. One evening, as we sat on the porch of my apartment, watching the sunset, Sarah turned to me with a smile. "Alex, I've been thinking, how would you feel about us moving in together?" Her question filled me with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Moving in together was a big step, but it felt like the right one. We had come so far, and I was ready to take that leap. "I'd love that," I said, taking her hand in mine. "Let's do it." As we started making plans for our future, I felt a sense of peace and fulfillment that had been missing for so long. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led me to this moment, VJ, a new beginning, filled with hope and possibility. Sarah and I moved in together, blending our lives and creating a home filled with love and laughter. Josh and Lily adjusted well, their resilience and positivity a constant source of inspiration. We faced challenges, but we faced them together, knowing that we were stronger as a unit. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that the pain and betrayal had shaped me, but they didn't define me. I had found a way to heal, to forgive, and to move forward. The future was uncertain, but it was also bright, filled with endless possibilities. In the end, it wasn't just about surviving the storm, VJ, it was about learning to dance in the rain. And with Sarah by my side, I knew we could weather any storm that came our way. Together, we were building a life filled with love, hope, and new beginnings, and that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all.